Chapter 5. Dakota. I found clothes that will fit, Dakota said, looking down at the jeans and black and red lumberjack shirt she changed into. She offered a small smile to Ronan as she twirled around looking down at her bare feet. But I will need some shoes too. I think I can get those for you. Your feet, however, is smaller than our were females. My mother may have some in her closet. Try the large closet to the left. The were females here make their own, but my mother was a human, and she had to buy hers in Seattle. Your mother a human? That's interesting. You have a place in Seattle? Dakota focused on Seattle. Getting home was her first and last thought. Maybe she could convince Ronan to take her home. Then she could find Ashton, and he could help her locate Paige and Thomas. She needed to find out what happened to them. She needed to have a clear mind when she hunted the vampires and killed them. Dakota never lost that ambitious thought, and now she had more reason than anyone to find Morgan and rid herself of him for more than one reason. She didn't know how she would approach it, but there had to be a way. Her mind had wandered, and when it returned she stood staring at Ronan, and he had been talking to her for more than a second when her eyes focused on his eyes. We never have a use for them on the island, because we can move about freely. Use for what? Dakota asked Ronan. She had missed his conversation because of her thoughts. Shoes, of course. You weren't listening. Perhaps you're hungry. Everyone dines in the large hall we passed on our way here. I'm not dressed for the occasion. You look beautiful. Dakota didn't see it. All she saw was a young face worn and scorched by the overcast sun and dried, cracked lips because of the lack of water. She needed something to give her some energy. A large steak and a cup of coffee would do it. Ronan took her hand. Do you want me to carry you? Are you insane? What will the others think of me? I'm already a human, and they think I'm a weakling too. You have been through a lot. I just thought it would be fitting to let everyone know, especially the werewolves, that you are my possession. You're what? Her eyes blinked and her brow furrowed. I'm no possession. I'm not a car or money. Maybe I didn't phrase that right. I don't want the other young wolves to get the impression that you can be claimed. They need to think that I have claims on you. In that way, when the moon is full, they will not attempt anything, but will just be satisfied with one of the beta females. Human females are considered alpha because of their behaviors, and they can give birth for years. When a werewolf has a human, he can have many sons into his old age. My father was very old, and I am his last son. Come, let's go. We will be late for supper. He took Dakota's hand. I can walk, thank you. He dropped his hands and backed away. Can I hold your hand? That will signal that I am claiming you. She raised an eyebrow. Only today. Ronan opened the door and let her through first. They strolled together hand in hand down the path to the large circle-type hall, across from Ronan's home. What happened to your brothers? You said there were 2 of you left here. They are scattered about the world. Some in the U.S. Some in Europe and Asia. The one here with me, Chase, we are the last ones of an elderly mother. We are the last 2 alphas here to carry on our name. I am the only one who isn't mated and have no pups. I will have to mate soon, before a beta challenges me for control of the pack, and mate with the single females such as yourself. The great dining hall wasn't far, but Dakota wanted to prolong the walk, and she slowed her stride, and Ronan kept pace with her. That's what I needed to talk to you about. Can you take me to the mainland soon? It would have to be at the 1st of the month. But that's too late. 2 weeks is a long time for me to remain here. Our ship isn't due until that time, and we are on vacation. Can't you call someone and arrange for a pickup? We have no cell phones or towers, there is no way it can be done. We perform ceremonies here when the vampires leave. It's the only place where we can be ourselves. When we reach Seattle, we are human again, and have to live with the stress of being human, and of humans finding out what we are. And that doesn't include running large companies. You wear suits and do all those things humans do? Of course we do. That's why you are bound by an oath not to disclose what you have seen here. I won't say anything. I'm good at keeping secrets. We're here. Can I take your hand? Yes. Of course. Ronan opened the doors to eyes, and when he stepped in with Dakota, the loud voices ceased and the whispering began. Ronan heard what the were females said. Dash 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 dash. My betas informed me that all the vampires have left except one. They haven't seen this vampire before, Ronan said, pausing at the entrance to the dining hall. Could you describe him? Dakota had been too eager in her tone. She had to dial it back to avoid suspicion. Ronan glanced at her, but he didn't know why she wanted to know about the vampire. He remembered her speaking about losing friends to the vampire Morgan. Perhaps she wanted to know if one was a friend, Ronan thought. The betas said he was tall, about 6 feet or more. Thin but muscular, and he had dark hair but blue eyes. That eliminated Elliot and Thomas. It could only be Ashton, Dakota thought. He had come looking for her. She felt relieved, and a closed smile lit up her face. We can go in now. I'm ready to face your pack, Dakota said, her eyes bright. Chapter 6. Ashton. The pain of embarrassment eased across Ashton's face. However, only he witnessed the regrets which occupied his empty existence. How could he go on? You haven't left the house for days. What is the matter, sir? Too consumed with thoughts of that day with Elizabeth, he didn't notice when Walker entered the room. This wasn't good. A vampire not aware of his surroundings was like a wolf who wasn't watchful of a hunter or a trap. It's nothing. I'll work in my lab this week instead of the hospital's lab. There's a change and a breakthrough appears close. But I'll need a month more of research. Furthermore, I don't want to be disturbed. Ashton turned to eye Walker, who appeared concerned about him. Walker didn't turn and leave, but put his arms across his chest as if waiting for a conversation, and when he didn't get any, he said, "What about the young woman you were hoping to marry? I haven't heard you speak of her." Leave me alone. I can't talk about that now, Ashton barked. Standing and pacing the room, Walker knew Ashton was troubled. The mention of Dakota never garnered an angry response before, but now it was as if Walker had ignited a bad memory at the mention of her name. Turning to walk away and confused because of the irritation in Ashton's voice, Walker said, "I forgot something. Sir, you had a guest, and he inquired about you and Dakota. Whether you were home, and whether Dakota was with you." Ashton's eyes lit up and he glared at Walker. "What did you tell him, or was it a female?" "A male. He said it's important, and he hoped he didn't come at the wrong time. When you're asleep. He knew you couldn't be disturbed during the daylight hours. He appeared to know something of your sleeping pattern. He says he will come again tonight." Ashton placed a shirt on, changing from the robe he had been wearing in his darkened lab. "Did he leave his name?" "Yes, his name is Thomas. Although he doesn't look like a Thomas." Ashton didn't inquire further about the last comment. He turned to look at Walker and said, "Show him in the minute he comes tonight. I will stop what I'm doing to talk to him. Make sure the cook has something prepared for him to eat. Sir, you need to sleep. You've been working during the day and night. You can't keep going at this pace." Ashton knew Walker was right in his assessment. All that would do would make him more vulnerable than he is now. He did feel weak, but perhaps it was because of the lack of food. He had forgotten about eating, with his mind full with the thoughts of Elizabeth and what he had done with her. Now she could use that against him. How could he explain to Dakota about his deceit, and how he broke their trust and bond by being with Elizabeth? He chided himself. He should have known better, but he had no choice but to be confined with Elizabeth in that underground quarters. He tried to resist Elizabeth. Maybe Dakota would understand. Maybe if he explained he had no choice, she could forgive him. However, he never told Dakota about his other life as a vampire dom. It wasn't bad enough that he was a vampire, but he had engaged in dominating and bondage. Something he would never do with Dakota. After thinking about what happened with Elizabeth, he had been more like a sub who had been duped into accepting a lifestyle he had been far removed from. He had been a scientist and focused until he met Elizabeth, who was then a human, who convinced him to enter a life of shocking and sordid existence, which would last even until now. After walking away from Elizabeth, he had gotten his life on track when she turned away from him and became Morgan's concubine sub. Before that unfortunate pairing with his brother Morgan, Ashton thought of asking Elizabeth to marry him. But that was because of the fog in his brain where he thought all that was left for him was to live a life of stalking and hunting humans for food with disregard of their lives. Ignoring the fact that humans were alive and with feelings, and that they wanted to live too like he wanted to live. Not thinking that there was more to his existence than the lifestyle of cruel and demeaning sex with Elizabeth, Ashton eventually shut himself away to be able to feel again. And he did after a long solitude, and with the love of Dakota. Now Elizabeth took all that away, and Ashton's back to where he left. Ashton had been more of a puppet to Elizabeth. She controlled how he thought from the day he met her, as a lovely human being. That all changed in one night when his desire for her was more ravenous than his need to discover a cure for himself. His lifestyle set him back years. He could have found his cure by now and been available to have a life with Dakota as a man or something resembling one. Falling asleep with his thoughts racing through his head, Ashton woke at the sound of a bell. He stood alert and weak. "I need to eat." Checking the time, it was indeed twilight, and in a few minutes darkness would descend over the city and through his widows. He can travel freely throughout Seattle and search for Dakota. If Morgan didn't have her, he certainly knew where she was, but he knew he had to rid himself of his brother. By introducing Elizabeth into his life and giving in to his base instincts, he had done the job for Morgan. Feeling dejected, he paced to the large room, stood on the closed balcony and stared out at the city. "Sir." Ashton turned startled. It wasn't good for a vampire to be absorbed in his thoughts, that he didn't know a human or anyone could get that close to him without him knowing. And now this had happened twice. "Yes." "What is it?" The furrowed brow indicated that Ashton was angry and disturbed, but Walker didn't know why. This wasn't the Ashton he knew. Ashton had been a vampire who had been single-focused and a pleasure to work for all these years. Now he appeared to be another person, and Walker didn't know this vampire. Walker remembered when his father had convinced him to work for Ashton. His family had known Ashton over 100 years and had taken care of him, but it was his father who had noticed a change in Ashton when his wife died and before and after he met Elizabeth. Walker's father didn't tell him why he couldn't work for Ashton any longer, besides being old and ill, but Walker's father soon realized that it had been Elizabeth who had changed this caring vampire. Now Walker was getting a first-hand look at how Ashton didn't appear to be the same once Elizabeth returned into his life. Ashton had always been reserved with no connections to the vampire communities and no interaction with humans other than at his hospital. Remembering what Walker's father said about Ashton, he now showed the same behavior many years before. Now Ashton took to venturing out at night, walking the streets, visiting opera houses, and engaging humans with talk for that human contact, or was it to feed? Then as now, Ashton no longer left the villa that he purchased for Elizabeth. He no longer worked in his laboratory, or did any kind of research, but instead, he waited as Elizabeth enticed men and women to his hidden room where they were never seen again. The servant remembered how the police would visit on occasion in search of missing men and women. Ashton had been complicit in the loss of all those young souls, and it showed on his face. However, Walker had convinced Ashton to leave Europe for the U.S. It was only then Ashton could have some semblance of life. When Walker discovered how happy Dakota had made Ashton, he thought there was hope for Ashton, but now he recognized the signs of that life he left in Europe, and that Elizabeth had returned to reclaim the vampire she lost in Rome. Because Walker didn't know if he could tolerate Ashton returning to that heinous life, he decided at the first signs he would have to leave him. But the signs were all around. When Walker returned to the foyer to show the guest into the large room, he watched as Thomas paced nervously around the room, wringing his hands and whispering to himself, "This is a bad idea. A terrible idea. Dr. Mieres will see you now. Follow me." Thomas jumped and turned at the servant's voice. "Yes. Yes." And he trotted behind the servant and came face to face with Ashton. Ashton's face smooth and pale, giving no hint of displeasure. Giving no sign of his feelings. But what kind of emotions would he have anyway, Thomas thought? Standing stiff and nervous, Thomas tried to relax, but his words were unnatural. "You look just like your picture." Those were the wrong words, Thomas thought as Ashton turned to reveal his displeasure. "What picture are you referring to?" Forgive me, Dr. Mieres, but a picture of you years ago in my country of India." The newspaper clipping attached in a scrapbook. "It's yellow and faded, but it looks just like you." "Perhaps you are confusing me with my father." "No, sir. There is no doubt it's you." Ashton moved within an inch of Thomas. "Look again," Ashton's tone scary. "I'm Dakota's friend, and she told me of her relationship with you. I know everything." That was a mistake to tell Ashton that. Thomas knew this the minute it left his mouth. He knew he shared too much, but he couldn't stop himself. It was who he was. Ashton's icy hand touched Thomas's chest, and Thomas stilled. He didn't know if he was drawing his last breath, but he believed Dakota when she said that Dr. Mieres wasn't like the other vampires. Ashton had a soul, and he wouldn't harm another human. But Thomas hadn't been with him inside that chamber last week when he made love to Elizabeth, and through their loving making he consumed her poisonous blood. The blood that seeped into his body and made him hungry for more. It would take all of Ashton's will to counteract the venom and the desire to return to his former sadomasochistic life with Elizabeth. "What is it that brings you to a vampire's home?" That was a great question. Either Thomas had lost his mind, or he wanted to die. In which case it was neither. "I was looking for Dakota, and I thought she would be here with you." "Why would she be with me?" "Because she said that you were looking for her, and that you two were in love?" Ashton tilted his head to the side, as if listening to the beat of Thomas's heart. It strummed fast and loud in his chest. He was indeed afraid of what Ashton would do. He had taken a chance of coming, but he knew he had to do this. "And what did you say to that?" Ashton asked after dropping his hand. Where his hand was located, he could have reached inside Thomas's chest and pulled out his heart. But it was as if Ashton had been mesmerized by the drumming of his heart. The truth was all Thomas could say. To say anything else, he felt that Ashton would know the truth, and he didn't want to lie. "I said that she had to be crazy to love a bloodthirsty being like a vampire." Ashton turned away and grinned. Thomas couldn't be more original and truthful. He liked this human, and he guessed that's why Dakota chose him as a friend. When Ashton turned on his heels, he maintained that serious demeanor that he showed before. "I have been looking for Dakota. Where is she?" "Don't you vampires have some telegraphic sense like bats or something?" "That is only in folktales. And if I had made Dakota my mate, no such thing occurred. I would never change her unless she wanted me to. If I changed her, I wouldn't want to be with her any longer. I love the beautiful little human, and I want a life with her. My dream is to grow old with her and for her to have my children. Thomas stood listening to a vampire's dreams. Terrifying as it appeared to Thomas, it was to Ashton the most beautiful thing that could happen to a vampire, including walking during the daylight hours. All his hopes and dreams were wrapped in Dakota and his research, and he hadn't completed any lately. Tell me what happened on that island, and how you got separated from Dakota. There isn't much to tell. I was hoping you had some answers. The only thing I remembered when I woke was seeing that boat near the shore. The one her friend Elliot told us about. I called out to Dakota, and waited as long as I could. The sunlight faded and night approached fast, and then I climbed into the boat and rowed looking for the vessel we hired. It was gone. But there were day trips vessels in the area that picked me up and brought me back to Seattle. I managed to get home with help. That's all I know, and now I'm here. Go home. I can't help you now until I find Dakota. What do you mean, help me? You're in danger. But I thought if I came here you would know what to do to find Dakota and protect me from your brother. If I knew that, there would be no need for me to ask you any more questions. Tell me, did you see anything? Because Dakota's not with Morgan. Something or someone must have taken her. I don't know if this helps, but I thought I had been carried to the shores by a large animal. Maybe a wolf. But that's ridiculous, isn't it? There wasn't anything outrageous about that statement. It had to be a werewolf, and Ashton knew it. After all, they had inhabited that island for as long as he had been a vampire, and he knew to stay clear of it. Only Morgan dared to upset their hunting grounds. You have to go now. I have to find Dakota before a werewolf lays claim to her. There is 1 week before the full moon. And Ashton disappeared before Thomas could respond, and his servant was standing near him. Can I drive you somewhere? The sound of another voice made Thomas jerk in fear, and then he caught his breath to answer. No, thank you. I can find my way home. There was no way Thomas trusted anyone or anything involved with the vampires. Too many people in his country had gone missing because they accepted a ride from a stranger.